Nomine Patris et Filii Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus.
Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen.
In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Brethren in Christ, laudate Jesus Christus.
In saecula.
This is Timothy Flanders with the Meaning of Catholic. We are here for another edition of Terror of Demons, the morning show, reclaiming traditional Catholic masculinity. I'm here as always with my friend, brother, and co-host, Kennedy Hall. Kennedy, how you doing, brother?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
Excellent. Doing very well. Welcome to the first week of Advent.
Mm-hmm.
The season has arrived. Today is the Feast of St. Andrew. So you have to begin your St. Andrew novena to obtain favors during this time. Very pious belief, wonderful tradition. St. Andrew today, and let's see who else. St. Edmund Campion tomorrow, a great English martyr priest from 1581. Let's see who else. St. Francis Xavier, Thursday, wonderful saint. One of those, don't you love those early Jesuits?
They were amazing.
Shout out to the early Jesuits. I mean, they were the shock troops up until like 1910. I mean,
They really were.
Teilhard de Chardin writes his first craziness out of his head during World War I. And that's the beginning of the end of the Jesuits right there.
They had some really good ones even up into the 60s and 70s.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we still have good Jesuits, even alive today, believe it or not. Shout out to
Mitch Pacwa.
Mitch Pacwa, yeah. Okay, so we got St. Francis of Xavier, St. Peter Chrysologus, the Chrysostom of the West on Friday. December is a great time for it's like December and January have a lot of excellent feast days, a lot of huge saints,
and a couple of big English saints like St. Edmund Campion. And
yes,
and then St. Thomas Becket in Christmastide,
right?
Which is huge,
yes,
huge,
St. Thomas Becket is huge.
That's the big leagues, and he's a really amazing example of the power of the office, because he was basically ordained and became a bishop within like 2 days, because he was handpicked by I think he was on the king's advice or something, and he wasn't known for being like a particularly pious or holy man. He was sort of just a really good administrator, really smart. They thought he'd make him a bishop, and then all of a sudden he gets filled with the graces of the office and is willing to get his head smashed in by a sword just to be true to the faith. I mean, that's brilliant.
He was. I know. Yeah, I know. Initially he was not so pious, but then he had some kind of conversion, and then boom. Yeah, that was one of the first feasts that were suppressed by Henry VIII,
of course,
for his own reason. So we'll get to that in a few weeks. So first week of Advent, very exciting time. I love the way that Advent begins. Intro of the Sunday. To thee have I lifted up my soul. In thee, O my God, I put my trust. Let me not be ashamed, neither let my enemies laugh at me, for none of them that wait on thee shall be confounded. And the collect is one of the few that are addressed to Jesus Christ. Yeah. So it says, addressing our Lord himself, stir up thy power, we beseech thee, O Lord, and come from the threatening dangers of our sins. May we deserve to be rescued by thy protection, to be saved by thy deliverance. Mm-hmm. A wonderful time wonderful way to begin this Advent season. And the gospel continues the vision of the end of times.
Yes.
And that is, so the liturgy really shows a lot of the four last things. It's actually not until, I believe, Ember Tide that we even get sort of the traditional gospel of, so the Ember Tide has the gospels of sort of the traditional Christmas gospels. So then you have
Yeah, that's right.
Because you've got St. John the Baptist, the second Sunday of Advent, and then only in Embertide is when you have the Annunciation, you have the Visitation, and then we have actually I believe it's actually, is it the birth on Saturday? The Saturday and Embertide has all sorts of great. Oh yeah, so this is it's St. John the Baptist again on Saturday. So the season of Advent is traditionally devoted to the four last things. So every week we're going to talk about one of the four last things. Today's episode is on death.
Yeah.
Death. We'll have death, judgment, and I usually reverse them for Advent. Death, judgment, hell, and heaven, because hell is the week of Embertide, so it's a great penitential week to begin. But Kennedy, you want to tell us about your weekend? You had you went to some kind of rally. Tell us about that.
Yeah, we went to it's called like a worship rally or something like that. It was like a non-denominational thing, but it was pretty big. I mean, it was in Toronto, and if anyone who knows Toronto, we were at Queen's Park, which is the legislature, and actually it's quite a beautiful building. But there's probably a couple thousand people there. A lot of them, it was non-denominational. It was just sort of a lot of pastors from various churches, so just talking about the importance of having churches open. And to be honest, a lot of these guys, their messages about the primacy of Christ and God's law in society was actually quite edifying. I mean, I wish our bishops would speak like they were speaking. And it was funny. I mean, they kept bringing up, they brought up Alfred the Great, not St. Alfred the Great, but they brought a lot of these guys were English, like they were like the Wesleyan types, but they brought up all these great English traditions of law based on 10 Commandments. So they brought up Alfred the Great, St. Alfred the Great, featured in that really interesting book series called The Last Kingdom. And obviously a real Catholic saint. They brought up Magna Carta, which is sort of part of the common law. But all these things were from before the Reformation. And it was awesome to hear them, because I'm thinking, you guys are making a wonderful case here for the Catholic understanding of the kingdom of Christ. And they did a really good job of showing, because Canada, I mean, we're Anglican. I mean, we're the loyalists, if you want to call us that. So if you look into the history of English common law, it is, for all intents and purposes, based on the basic principles of Catholic kingship of Christ, because it's from before the Reformation mostly. So they were bringing up all these old things in Canadian tradition and law tradition, and they were really good. And they were all talking about how, even our charter is supposed to be understood under the supreme law of the lawgiver, and like the 10 Commandments are the basis, and it's in our coats of arms and all this kind of stuff. We have a psalm on our coat of arms. It's from C to C, but it's from one of the psalms. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so it was really interesting. I mean, it was fun. It's interesting though, because we were there as a bunch of trads, so a bunch of skirt wearing ladies and whatever. But then there was also but we were holding up this massive banner about the rosary will bring peace to Canada. And then, but most of the Protestants there were, they weren't Mennonites, but they were from this very conservative branch. It's called the Church of God, which is truly, and it's like kind of a Dutch Reform thing, but they're very conservative, and like they look like Mennonites. So it was kind of funny, this two different instantiations of modesty, I guess. But it was fun. It was fun. It was an interesting crowd.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, the Magna Carta, he who interferes with the church is excommunicated, which was first violated by the Protestant Reformation of England, Henry VIII. Yeah, we talked last week with David Wemhoff about how there was 18 separate efforts, largely by Protestants in the United States since 1864, to amend the Constitution to acknowledge Christ the King. So we certainly all failed, of course. But yeah, there's certainly a time to make common cause with the Protestants. If there ever was a time for a true ecumenism of at least like what they have in Hungary, where they have a Protestant president who has a certain there's a certain Christian law and ethos of the government in Hungary, even though it's Protestants and Catholics together. Yeah, certainly something to support, and that's great. So today is death, Santa Claus, and the Star Trek vaccine. So let's talk about death. I wanted to start with this quote from Henry Sear. He is going to be on the show tomorrow. We recorded that last week talking about this book. And he has this great quote on page 157. He says, "The wealth and comfort of modern life became the bribe by which man was brought to ignore the riches of the spirit. That was the bid by which Satan offered limitless power in this world to a humanity that had been shown the vision of the next. All this will I give thee, if falling down thou wilt adore me." I think that really encapsulates the way that the remembrance of death, in my mind, the holiness is the proportionate to one's own remembrance of death in some sense. And therefore, sin or sinfulness or debauchery, whatever you have of this modern world, is also proportionate to our forgetfulness of death in our modern Pluto technocracy that we live in, where we live for 100 years old and then we kill the elderly or the sick because we have forgotten that we are going to die. We're so insulated from even the natural world, from farms or livestock, making our food. Everything's so insulated that we have been completely anesthetized from the fact that we're going to die. And we saw that this year with COVID-1984, when only a small percentage of people even die from it, and everyone lost their minds.
They lost their minds. I was talking to my priest a couple days ago. We're trying to figure out what to do. If we still here are allowed in the county that I'm in, and the couple surrounding, we're still allowed to have 30% capacity, worship, whatever. So we had mass yesterday. It was wonderful. But we don't know if we're going to have it in a couple weeks. Who knows? All the stipulations are based on like cases per 100,000, which is so arbitrary. And it's so arbitrary. It's like they changed it too. They came out with a few weeks ago. They came out with we're in like different colors. It's very racist. I'm just kidding. But it's like, green zone and orange zone and yellow zone and red zone and lockdown zone. And we started in green zone where we live, and the freest they will allow you to be in Ontario right now is you can have 10 people over to your house, or 50. They don't make it clear. Seriously, it says 10 people unless it's another, or 50, and it doesn't distinguish between them because it's not a real law anyway. But anyway, within a week or two, they changed the criteria. So we had less cases in my county than we had the week before. Because they changed the criteria, we jumped up to the orange zone. We were one away from red. Just because they arbitrarily changed, it's like we're just as healthy as we were a week ago, but now we're in danger. Anyway, so we still have it. So we were trying to figure out what we're going to do if we do get locked down, because we are not going to go through another lockdown with no mass. So we were talking about how we should do things, and our priest basically said, this whole coronavirus hysteria on the part of the politicians, they've all collectively made a decision that they will not be responsible for one single death. That's what, and in their minds, it's ridiculous because they are going to be responsible for deaths based on increasing disease because of poverty and suicide and so forth. But the world is enamored with the coronavirus, so they're not going to be responsible for a single coronavirus death. I was talking to a doctor friend. He's an ER doctor. And I said, what the heck is going on with you guys? I mean, he's smart. He's traditional and sees through all this nonsense. And he basically said, Kennedy, the logic of most doctors right now, unfortunately, or his colleagues at least, is like if people are dying from suicide, that's better than them from dying from coronavirus. That's basically what because coronavirus is more dangerous than suicide. And it's like, it doesn't make any sense, but that's their logic. So people have lost their minds about this. People are afraid of dying.
Yeah. So, but this throws into relief the importance of remembering that we are going to die. And some people have lost family members to COVID or otherwise. Yeah. And this is an opportunity to pray for them and remember that we're going to die too. And people think about the end of the world and we can get caught up in prophecies and speculations.
Right.
We shouldn't get too obsessed about those things, because if we die, whenever we die,
that's your end times.
the end of the world will be there.
Yeah.
And I truly believe that the remembrance of death is victory over every sin, because when you're facing temptation and you remember that you're going to die and you're going to face judgment and you'll either go to heaven or hell, it's a very powerful deterrent for these lies of Satan that Seer points out here. In this modern world, we are, especially in a lockdown situation, many of us are tempted to despair, to sloth, which often brings about the excitement of these temptations, which are simply things of this earth, which are passing away. And then when we remember our death, it's sort of an ironic thing, because the world says that if you think about death, it's depressing. But in fact, it's the opposite. When you think about death, you actually really gather a purpose. Everything that is earthly sort of passes away. As long as you need to have a proper balance, because you need to have a true hope as opposed to a despair or a presumption. We talked about this a few weeks ago. Just the presumption is an excess of hope, where you are presuming on God's mercy and you are not a penitent. You're just thinking that you'll go straight to heaven because you think you're great or something like that, or you think God is so merciful that he's just going to force everybody to go to heaven against their will, like the Dare We Hope thesis. Or you are despairing and you're thinking that you're beyond God's mercy, and you think that just because you are a sinner, that God will not pardon penitence, which is a lie. God will pardon penitence. God will pardon the sinners who repent. And so true hope, in the face of death, we think about being a penitent and hoping in God's mercy. So the importance of remembering our death, centering on a true hope, really helps us face the despair. It is such a powerful thing, a powerful deterrent, a switch against so many earthly attachments, whether that's temptations or otherwise. It is a remarkable thing to just remember our death. So we need to pray for God to help us remember death. It's very difficult to remember death in our modern area.
Yeah, we're all in our end times. That's, this is why, when people say, are we in the end times? We are in the end times. This is why the church starts Advent with these prophecies about the end of the world, because since Christ has come, then that age has passed. Like there was the waiting for the coming of Christ. There was Christ's time on earth. And now there is waiting for the second coming. And the second coming is the end times. And Christ tells us to be watchful, because we never know when it's going to happen. There's certain signs, I guess, that they agree upon, I guess, that need to happen. But nonetheless, those could happen like that. Those could happen within a week. Off the top of my head, they talk about Elias coming back or being killed in the street or something like that. And the restructuring of the temple in Jerusalem and things, those things could happen within a matter of months. And you have no idea when those things will happen. And this is something to remember as we're talking about death. Okay. Death is unexpected. Father Isaac does a wonderful series on this. You can see at the Fatima Center, 4 last things. He did it for Lent, but it applies to now. And he goes through, he scares the tar out of you, but he goes through, just when he opens up his death lecture conference, I guess, he goes through just all of these unexpected deaths he's heard about in the news over the years, from a guy driving on the highway home from a shift at the hospital, near New York City, and a truck that's on a bridge that's like over there away from the guy. It like flips and something comes out of there and flies 400 yards and slices the guy's head off in his car. Like, just crazy stuff. You never know when your days are going to be numbered. So be watchful. And, right now, keep that in your mind, because in the same way that death could be around the corner and completely unexpected, so too are all unexpected things. This is why when it comes to trying to figure out what's going to happen with our governments or with the coronavirus or whatever, we have no idea. And one thing I actually I was thinking about, if I could offer this to my fellow conspiracy-minded traditional Catholics, okay? It's real, like, being negative or being defeatist is just the other side of the coin as blindly trusting the government. Wow, we're all screwed. We're going to be in concentration camps and whatever. You have no idea. You have no idea what's going to happen. And the one person who's great on this is Charles Coulomb. And he made me realize this. He's great on everything.
Oh, yeah. Glad trad.
He's the best. And but he made me realize this when at the beginning of coronavirus, when no one was sure about certain things. And he just mentioned, he said, listen, I grew, this is not to me, but on a podcast. And he's like, I grew up and the Berlin Wall was apparently going to be standing forever. Like he said, I thought I was going to have to go into a massive all-out nuclear war with the Soviets because he was trained in the military.
Right, yeah.
And then all of a sudden the wall's falling, and it's like, obviously we still have Marxism in philosophical sense, but the world changed drastically, and no one saw it coming except for those who were involved. Death is going to happen to all of us at an unexpected time, and in the same way, people around the world are doing things right now that you have no idea even exist. You have no idea what's happening in politics, in the backroom meetings. You have no idea what's happening with rebellions in other countries. You're going to wake up one day, you're going to see the news, and just like that, the world is going to be completely different than it was before. And that could happen tomorrow. That could happen in 50 years. It could happen anytime in between. So try not to fall into negativity about your life, because you don't know when your moments will be your last. And also, don't fall into negativity about the state of the affairs in the world, because it's just as possible that things could turn around for the better just as much as they could turn around for the worse.
Yeah, these things are in God's hands, and he is the one who rules the nations, not George Soros.
That's right.
No matter how much he thinks he does.
Yeah.
But great reminder for hope and despair, presumption versus despair, remembering that we have true hope. Once again, a reminder to everybody, let me see. So over at meaningofcatholic.com, we've got under articles, skip over here and go down to spiritual. We have a whole section on the 4 last things. Articles by myself and Kennedy. We've got Kennedy Hell's articles, Nathaniel Richards, myself as well. So the 4 last things. So before we move over to Santa Claus, how do we practically remember death? What practical things, Kennedy, do you recommend been helpful to you or you know of where we can help us remember a death?
Have crucifixes everywhere. I have a crucifix in my garage where I work out. And it's a very bloody one because I remember death. And also when I'm working out, there's sort of an aspect of pushing through and remembering the cross and the suffering and all that. But we have crucifixes everywhere. And that's classic Catholic tradition. Have crucifixes over every doorway or whatever, at least in every room. You see it. Okay, yeah. Crucifix, Jesus died on the cross. Okay, death is real. That's a very practical one. Don't underestimate the psychology of images as well. That's one thing that we have as Catholics, which is magnificent. It's not even that you have a conscious, you're not necessarily thinking to yourself, oh, death, but you're seeing Christ crucified, which subconsciously you're remembering the fact that the wages of sin is death. If you're praying a daily rosary, if you do the 3 a day, then I guess you're going to pray the sorrowful every day. But at least if you're praying the sorrowful twice a week, you're going to remember death in that sense. So the daily rosary does that. And then I guess if you've shared a ton of this stuff on your Twitter as well, but there's various devotional practices like reading St. Alphonse's Preparation for Death. A good we have a prayer book called Blessed Be God. It's a classic. It's a wonderful book. It really is like the best prayer book that it has ever been made, I think. It even has the traditional mass in it. And we also have the Christian Warfare one, which is like the Society of St. Pius X prayer book, which is very good as well. But anyway, good evening prayers. You read, you pray that, accept your death if it comes. So just basic Catholic prayer practice of evening prayers, crucifixes, and the rosary, and you should probably never forget that you're going to die.
Yeah, I really like the compline in the Western Rite begins with God grant us a quiet night and a peaceful death. In the New Rite, it ends with that. So they didn't take that out, thankfully, but there is a remembrance for death at your sleeping when you go to sleep, because going to sleep is a euphemism for death in the scriptures. And it's also a type, an icon of your own death in the future. So a great practice is to be like the monks. They they would build a coffin and then they'd sleep in the coffin to remember that they're going to die. And you don't have to build a coffin, but you can remember that you're going to die when you lay down to sleep. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord and my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, pray the Lord and my soul to take. There you go. Perfect. So Lord grant us quiet night and a peaceful death. Laying down on your bed, looking up, you're prone, you're totally prone. A great way to think about dying and being judged by the Lord, thinking of the fact that you will one day lie down in your grave and then you will be judged by the Lord. So it's a great period, a great thing to, I think of laying down in the grave and then looking up. You're 6 feet under, you're in the grave, you're looking up at the sky, and they're tossing the dirt on top of you, they're burying you, and you are just looking up to God for the only mercy that you can have, and the mercy at his judgment seat, knowing that you have not done any good deed in your life, but solely on the basis of his mercy you can lay claim to heavenly glory by his mercy. And so I think that is a great meditation that you can have every single night when you go to sleep, thinking about your death. Fall asleep saying, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, the sinner.
Yep.
So the compline prayers of the church really give us. There's a great prayer in the Eastern Rite over in the Coptic Rite where the compline prayer says, it just simply says, I'm about to stand before thy judgment seat. I'm about to stand before judgment. I have not done any good deed. Lord, have mercy on me. So it reminds us every single night, I'm about to be judged. I'm about to die. I'm about to be judged. So great way to remember it. Also in the morning, you can, with your morning prayers, you can think about that you're going to die, to make this day your last day, that you're going to be alive, offer it up to the Lord, fiat that it be done to me, whatever befalls me, let me offer it up in punishment for my sins. If I receive suffering, and to live without any earthly attachment. So it's remembrance of death. So 4 last things, part 1. With that,
Good news,
so Santa Claus.
Yeah.
Santa Claus. So Santa Claus is some sort of legendary connection with Saint Nicholas.
Do you remember the WWE? There was that clip when they had to do the press conference about how like it wasn't actually totally real.
What?
It was a thing in like
they did that
early 2000s. Yeah.
Okay.
And there was a guy, and he was like, "It's still real to me," and that was he cried out, and the guy was like, "I know, buddy. I know. I get it. It's real in your heart." Santa Claus is awesome in my opinion, and I know a lot of trads right now, they're going to have steam coming out of their ears and how dare you believe in Santa Claus. I'm gonna let you guys in a little secret. Every single Christian culture in history had folklore. They believed in the in the innocent sense, the idea of the magical things in the forest. They had stories about leprechauns, and they had stories about elves, and they had stories about fairies. That's where fairy tales come from. They had traditions that were totally imaginative and whimsical, and none of those things harmed their Catholic faith in the sense where it just was part of their folklore. We have this idea in our modern, very rationalistic age that there is only hard, objective, true realities, and anything that is not part of those is going to somehow stop our kids from believing in God. That's the one thing that you hear from people all the time is, well, if my kids believe in Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny or something, then they're probably going to become atheists because they're going to think. That was never the case in Christendom. If you look, I mean, think of the glory of the literary tradition of fairy tales. Where does it come from? It comes from the great ages of Catholic faith in Europe. Because when you have a pure soul, because you're living in a state of grace, you have a pure imagination. And when you have a pure imagination, you become like a child and you play make-believe. And this is just before we even talk about the origin of Santa Claus. For us, generally speaking, who live in this sort of Anglo world, our tradition of Father Christmas is a very English tradition. Okay. But it's a time of year when we get so excited about the most amazing supernatural event of the coming of Christ that we literally are overwhelmingly joyful with this giddy anticipation of this special day that we become like little children where we actually have to play a game. That's what Santa Claus is for people. The commercialization, sure, the Coca-Cola Santa, that's wrong. I mean, just like Easter. I mean, the Easter Bunny is a Catholic tradition. People don't realize that. You can't eat eggs during Easter. You can't eat red meat, and you'd give up sweets. So what do you have? You have this pretend creature that brings you around eggs and represents most peasants would have rabbit stew on Easter because that was the red meat they could finally have. It's a totally Catholic thing. Of course, Cadbury turns it into this whole commercial, whatever. That's what the culture does with things. But you don't give up these wonderful traditions, or you don't have to, because the culture makes them suck. Because that's what the culture does to a lot of things in our society. So just as a primer, there's nothing wrong with having whimsical folklore traditions. It's actually quite a Christian thing because it's a manifestation of a pure conscience, which gives you a pure childlike imagination.
Yeah, I think that's great. It's about becoming a child.
Yes,
Our Lord said, unless you be converted and become like children, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven.
exactly.
And especially for those of you who have children, you understand this. You play make believe, you play magic and fairy tales and all sorts of fun stuff with your kids. So that's what Santa Claus is. It's simply a personification of the spirit of Christmas, the joy of Christmas, which is really sort of this instantiation of Saint Nicholas, who's a real person, a real saint.
Yep.
And so Saint Nicholas comes into our families as Santa Claus, Father Christmas, Kinder Claus, etc.
Yeah.
And I have I found the the great cartoon. So when Cromwell in the brave new Republican world of 1650s England,
Yeah.
Here's the cartoon this is from 1652 when they banned Christmas, and the Cromwellian Puritan says, "Keep out, you come not here." And Father Christmas says, "Sir, I bring good cheer." And then the good Christian says, "Old Christmas, welcome, do not fear."
Yeah.
So Father Christmas, it's simply a personification of the spirit of Christmas melded with Saint Nicholas.
Mhm.
So it's basically, I mean, I view it as Saint Nicholas, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, I would just in our house we call Santa Claus Saint Nicholas, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And he comes and makes a stop at our house on December 6th, where we get some chocolates and some gold coins because he gave the coins to the girl who was threatening to be sold into prostitution, which is a real story.
Yeah.
So he gave gold coins to them, and he provides for the needy, and he loves little children. And then he comes to our house to bring presents and good cheer as Father Christmas.
Yep. And you know what, too? We have such a myopic view. I've actually have an episode in 2 weeks coming out for the Fatima Center on Santa Claus. And we're not taking a position one way or the other, but it's just the idea of, this year has been so awful that for the last month of our videos, we decided to do really fun, hopeful, because we just did one on like Pope Francis and Freemasonry. Like we've had enough heavy videos at the Fatima Center for a bit. So we did these 4 on getting ready for Christmas and the joy of it and all that kind of stuff. So one of them was on Santa Claus, and I just go over in there the history of gift giving. It's not a uniform tradition in the church. The December 6th is a classic day because of St. Nicholas. But you have to remember, that's not how the first 4 centuries would have been, because the cult of the sainthood of St. Nicholas wouldn't have grown until after he died. And he was around in the mid to late 300s by the time, the early mid 300s by the time he died. So we have 400 years or so of Christian history before we even have a specific St. Nicholas Day. The 25th is a, generally speaking, kind of modern gift giving day. Not unheard of, but it was a popular thing in sort of Northern Europe and in English parts. In France, they often gave gifts on January 1st, the turn of the new year, which isn't even, I mean, liturgically, it's an important day, but it's not Christmas or Epiphany. It's just within Christmastide. And then most people that are from Mediterranean Catholic traditions will understand that the Epiphany is the biggest gift giving day. In Italy, you get gifts on the 25th and you get gifts on the 6th. and they're both like, it's like a second Christmas. It's great when you own the 6th. So these things are all over the map in Christian tradition. So people will sometimes nitpick and say, well, it's not even, they'll basically have a historical critique about why we shouldn't have Santa Claus. And I'm thinking, you have no idea of the 30 different customs. I mean, there's a custom, shout out to Anthony Stein at Return to Tradition. He had a tweet about, there's a tradition in Wales where, and it's Catholic somehow, where a man wearing the skull of a dead horse comes to your door, and you have to sing songs back and forth. And if you stop being able to rhyme, it's basically like an old school freestyle battle, but for Celtic peoples, Welsh peoples. And they come in and drink all your beer if you don't sing the songs or something. It somehow has something to do with Christmas. They're folk traditions. The reality with all of these things is you just don't offend God. Using your imagination and playing make-believe does not offend God because it's very childlike. Now, that being said, for a lot of people, Christmas is only about Santa Claus. Well, that's wrong. And the history of Santa Claus would tell you that, because Saint Nicholas, and this is another thing too. One of my favorite Christmas movies is Miracle on 34th Street. Both of them. I really like the new one as well. I think they did a good job on the 1990s one. But in that, the man who is Saint Nicholas, he has a really big temper. And he, at least in the 1990s version, one of the men who's trying to get him arrested, he basically accuses him of being a pedophile. He accuses him of being inappropriate with kids. And Saint Nicholas loses it on him and tries to beat him with his cane, which is awesome. But that stems from the Saint Nicholas tradition of him punching or slapping Arius because he was blaspheming the divinity of Jesus Christ. So all of these things are this in the Santa Claus tradition are aspects of Saint Nicholas, and they manifest a true Christian zeal. And even with the stockings and the fireplaces, apparently people used to put their stockings and their shoes by their fireplaces at night in the winters in Turkey, which is where Santa Claus was from, or Saint Nicholas. And I guess the way that the ventilation in the homes were built, when you would toss things through the windows, it would land near the shoes and the stockings. So that's where there's this idea that you would have things in your stocking and shoes. So all of these traditions, they're just folklore, and they're all based on some historical aspect. I have friends that, and maybe they're watching, I'll make fun of them a little bit, but they're Dutch Catholic, so they're really big into St. Nicholas Day, but they never do Santa Claus. And I'm like, you're doing the same thing. You're just doing it on a different day. I mean, you don't actually believe St. Nicholas came in through your window last night and legitimately put candies in your kids' shoes, but you tell them that anyway. It's no different. And by the way, St. Nicholas would not have been giving out gifts on his feast day because it didn't exist yet. He would have been giving them out during the Christmas tide, which starts on the 24th, 25th. So all of those traditions are equally as valid, and they're just fun and whimsical. So have at it.
Yeah, I think, we definitely, we love the folklore and the folk traditions that our fathers brought to us, and they are various. And these are the sort of things that make children just enjoy the aspects of our faith, which simply involve things like candy, things like chocolate, things like presents. It's something that warms the heart of a child to just have fun for stories and folklore and whatnot, which allows them to gradually attach their heart to Jesus Christ through the liturgical calendar and the various traditions that we build up for them in their years, their small child years. I think that these traditions are so important for us to just gather the heart of the child to the worship of the home.
Yep.
And so I certainly, for many years, I was very skeptical of Santa Claus because of its basically mythical character and the idea that, like you said, the concept that the child will lose his faith because he believed in a make-believe. Now, I don't really go into a bunch of huge pageantry with Saint Nicholas or Santa Claus. I don't really, some parents may want to go to great lengths and have cookies and milk and a huge story and a huge elaborate sort of keeping like I mean I don't go to a huge effort to try to deceive my child more and more and more and more. You know what I mean? That's to me that's like kind of counterproductive. It's like parents want to have fun with their kids like that. It's like, but I think that it's sort of like I let my child sort of lead the play, and we sort of just enjoy the whole spirit of Christmas. So I think it's just a great way to celebrate Christmas and enjoy the season. So
It's awesome.
It you don't need to overthink it more than that.
No, you just have fun.
It's
fun, and it makes you. I mean, we do this with our kids with a million different things. You know, like if your kid's having bad dreams. I can't remember one of my kids. You know, they were having a bad dream, and they were like, well, are there superheroes that are going to protect me or something? And I said, sure, buddy. Like superheroes are going to protect you. He's a kid, and he had a sweet sleep after that because he thought that like Batman would make sure that he was fine. I also told him about guardian angels and stuff. Relax, everybody. But the point is, like he's a child, and we just had fun. And our kids run around right now every night, and they're like, "Dad, I hear Santa Claus on the roof with my imagination." That's what they're saying. And I'm like, okay, buddy. It's like I saw him. I'm like, all right, buddy, that's great. I'm happy. And then they just can't wait for Christmas. And we tell them it's about baby Jesus, and that's the most important thing. They get it. But again, this idea that people will lose their faith, that's a rationalistic approach. People lost their faith when the liturgy changed. People lost their faith when the theology in the church collapsed. But at the time when the theology in the church was at its height, folklore traditions were far and wide.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Historically, looking at Father Christmas and Santa Claus, there wasn't a loss of faith due to those things.
No, and there is always a risk in any Christian age of either rationalism or superstition. And to be honest, I think one of the ways that we guard against that is you avoid becoming a Puritan and you avoid becoming a pagan. You know, it's like have your whimsical traditions rooted in the Catholic faith rather than disregarding all whimsical traditions. And then it's kind of like, teach your kids to drink responsibly by giving them wine with dinner when they're a young teenager at your house so that they don't go off and become binge drinkers. In the same way, if you raise them in a totally rationalistic household where everything's puritanical, they're going to go off and they might lose it. And on the other hand, if you raise them in a totally superstitious household, they might go off and become a rationalist and lose it in another way. So it's always that golden mean that we have that we get from the Aristotelian tradition.
Absolutely. That's exactly going right along with what we talked about hope in the first part of this show. The mean between superstition, which is an excess of hope within a religious act of some kind, an excess of hope that you can receive. You can sell your house solely by the basis of burying St. Joseph upside down in your yard.
Yes.
Not because you prayed and God gave it to you, but because you did this little act. That is a superstition.
Yeah.
Or rejecting all folklore whatsoever. I think that's a great point because I think it is something that when there is an imbalance on either way, because of the nature of the child, he will rebel against an extreme on one side or the other.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. I'll say just before we move on to the talk of the vaccine, for me, Santa Claus actually weirdly was part of bringing me back to the church, which I know sounds crazy.
There we go.
Because when I was, I was secular or whatever, and I wasn't practicing, and I was never really that much of a intentional Catholic growing up. But when I was in my mid-20s and I was trying to figure it all out, when I started thinking about we were getting married and having kids, I started thinking about family life. And do I baptize my kids? Just from a general tradition perspective, like just from a cultural Italian traditions. And I remembered how happy I was at Christmas time as a kid and how much I loved the anticipation of Santa Claus. I didn't confuse believing in Santa Claus with believing in God. But what I realized subconsciously about myself, and I wasn't able to articulate it until a couple years later, I realized that what I missed was childlike innocence. And then when I confessed and I was living in a state of grace for the first time in years, I realized that childlike innocence was only possible if I had the heart of a child because I was living in friendship with God in a state of grace. So the beauty of the Christmas tradition of Santa Claus it reminded me of what it meant to be not jaded by the world and to be a child, which gave me a yearning for being closer to God.
That's beautiful. Yeah, that's exactly what we're trying to do with our children, is to build that childlike innocence, to have that childhood that is able to be remembered for their whole life, that they remember this joy. We are doing the good deeds for Jesus. So when my one of my children does a good deed, then they get a piece of yarn to put in the manger.
Cool.
That's currently empty, and then baby Jesus is going to come on Christmas Eve. We'll put baby Jesus on the yarn of the good deeds, which is obviously a symbol of a spiritual reality, but to them, it's just putting straw under baby Jesus's manger so he can be comfortable. So obviously it's not a real thing. If we get all rational about it, we're going to get all, don't do that because you're not actually whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Point is, we're just enjoying the fun of Christmas and the spirit of Christmas, which is welcoming Jesus Christ, the charity of brotherhood, and four last things. So on that note, coming to a quadrant near you at warp speed, the Star Trek vaccine. Mm-hmm. So there are currently 3 vaccines. Mm-hmm. There's Moderna, and Pfizer. Those are the ones that are reported to be 90% effective plus. And there's a third one. Which was that? BioNTech, was it? There was one other one that was less. The mainstream media was saying that was less effective of some kind. So we have 15 minutes left in our time here. Kennedy, can you tell us about the Star Trek vaccine? First, do we have any of these? Are any of these made from murdered children?
Yeah.
So, do we know about those? Go ahead.
Well, it's actually a mix. I don't remember off the top of my head, but do your research. But not all of the vaccine prototypes for this whole thing. And I should just give a primer here. I'm not advocating for you to get a vaccine one way or the other. I personally am not a fan of vaccines, just in my own personal life. And I've made my decisions for that, for my own research and my own thought about the matter. However, I understand the logic of why people would be okay with vaccines, because if I'm putting myself in their shoes, I get the logic of, like Dr. Ethan that we had on. He was a fan of vaccines. He's obviously a very faithful Catholic. He does not, he advocates for ethical vaccines and whatever. I don't agree with the idea that you even need them in the way that they're presented to us. Nonetheless, I understand the logic of why somebody would. So it's a medical healthcare decision. People have to make their decisions on that. New book out by Pam Acker, Dr. Pam, or not doctor, but she's just a scientist, Pam Acker, but she's with the Kolbe Center. It's called A Catholic Perspective on Vaccinations or something like that. Apparently it's great. I've heard her talk. It's great. She's a totally scientifically minded woman and a very faithful Catholic, and she goes through that. So that's, perhaps do your research. Okay. The church has teachings on what we're supposed to do with vaccinations if they are derived from fetal tissue. It's just basically Thomistic distinctions between formal cooperation and material cooperation. For example, if I want to get a pair of running shoes and I buy running shoes from Nike objectively in third world countries exploits the poor, which is a sin that cries out to heaven. I am not purposefully facilitating their exploitation of the poor if the only place I can get running shoes that is available reasonably to me sells Nike running shoes. I have a distant material cooperation because I give that company money. We have Pampers diapers sometimes. Pampers, stupidly, donates to Planned Parenthood. That doesn't seem like a very good marketing strategy on their part. But anyway, I'm not trying to support abortion by buying Pampers diapers. But when I go to the grocery store, there's only one box available in my kid's size. That's what I buy. It's a very distant material cooperation. That's how the church views any participation in any of these things that would be attached to evil. So as far as vaccinations go, there are various vaccinations historically that are derived from fetal tissue. And they do have to be regenerated over a certain amount of time. So it's not as if it happened 50 years ago and then it never happens again. They have to do something with the cell line. So there are periodic refreshments, let's say, in a demonic sense, of the actual vaccination specimens. But the church has always said that, as with all things in medicine, economics, and so forth, if basically the CDC put out a thing about 15 years ago or so, I can't remember when.
CDF.
Yeah. Or CDF. Yeah. CDC. Goodness. Vaccinations on the brain. And just like if it was a medicine that was necessary and there was a nefarious past in it, you're not formally participating in it. It's a material cooperation. Anyway, that's why the Society of St. Pius X put out an article the other day that people got really upset about. They weren't advocating for vaccinations one way or the other. They were just basically repeating church teaching, which is ironic. People will get mad at the SSPX for being obedient to Rome. But anyway, so the coronavirus vaccines that are out, some of them are derived, or at least seem to be derived from fetal tissue. There's one that's not. I can't remember which one, but it does seem like they've all at least been tested on fetal cell lines. So that's because, that's one of the things they do in their testing procedures is they don't just go and inject everybody with a experimental vaccine. They'll test them on human tissue, which they've derived. So it doesn't seem like with the coronavirus vaccine, it doesn't seem like you can avoid some sort of cooperation with testing or derivation from fetal tissue. I don't think that that's possible. Now, here's the thing, though. I'm going to say something controversial here. Again, I don't advocate for any vaccine because I'm not a fan of them. Nonetheless, I understand the logic of why people like them. There was a bishop that said that like all Catholics need to avoid the coronavirus vaccine if it stems from fetal tissue or whatever. That's not officially what the CDF has said on the matter. So this is a very real dilemma that people are facing in their lives. If you're in a place, like let's just say you're in an actual totalitarian country and you're a Catholic, and they won't let you get they won't let you access the hospital if you don't have a vaccination, which is totally possible. You're not committing a mortal sin if you suffer the effects of material cooperation with an evil that you did not participate in, if that makes sense. And that's what the church says about vaccinations in general. As far as the corona vaccine's effectivity or effectiveness, you have a 99-point-something% chance of surviving anyway. If you're under the age of 70, it's basically 100% chance. I don't know why you ever risk it on a vaccine that's 90% effective when you have a 100% chance of not dying from something. But from a material cooperation with any fetal research or whatever, fetal cell research, that's what the church says on the matter.
Yeah, there's already a flu vaccine.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I've ever even gotten the flu vaccine, but the flu vaccine exists. And before the coronavirus, the COVID-1984 happened, there were still hundreds of thousands dying every year with a flu vaccine. Yeah. So even if the COVID-1984 virus vaccine is 100% effective, so to speak, will it even decrease the number of deaths? I was checking on what the mainstream news speak media was saying, and they were saying, I was just doing like CBS or NBC yesterday, and they said, well, even if we get the vaccine out, we still are going to need to mask up, social distance, and lockdown for some time after the vaccine. Yeah. So besides this, we have the fact that this is what was brought up in the last show on vaccines, that even vaccines that are effective, like Dr. Ethan, obviously he comes from the pro-vaccine perspective from a Catholic side of things, but even he would say that even vaccines that are supposed to be effective take years, even decades, to develop into something that is both effective and not lots of side effects.
Exactly.
So the idea of a warp speed vaccine is already just a joke. I mean, we can't, not leaving aside the fact that there's this material cooperation, which you're saying, like you said, the CDF did say that you can have material cooperation if there is a grave cause. Like you said, like you're in a country where you're not going to be able to buy groceries for your 6-month-old child. You're not going to be able to buy diapers or formula or whatever you need for your children because you don't have a vaccine. And you're in a situation like that. Their church says maybe the church says you can, that is allowed because it's a remote material cooperation. Because we have, like you said correctly, we have remote material cooperation in evil all the time in our modern world.
Yeah.
The difficulty is certainly that we all would want to abstain completely
Mhm.
from any sort of cooperation whatsoever from these things. But like you said, you buy Pampers and they donate to Planned Parenthood, so you're still supporting child murder.
I pay my
But
taxes and they go to the Canadian
yeah,
government. Which
right.
fund portion is healthcare. Should
Yeah.
I go to jail and not pay my taxes? Like, maybe. No.
Yeah, but it's a difficult thing that I think all Catholics would want to certainly avoid if possible, and only in the gravest circumstances would we allow that. But even if that wasn't a consideration, a warp speed vaccine already has a ton of risks because it's been developed at warp speed.
It's dumb.
Besides the fact that scientists cannot even debate about the COVID virus. You start debating about it and you get silenced. There's no scientific debate. That's how you develop anything scientifically, is you have a scientific debate. You present data, another scientist critiques that data, and you go back and forth, and that's how actual science happens. Now we have ideology instead of science.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't even develop a vaccine if we wanted to.
No, it's dumb. It's totally nonsense. So wherever you live, I mean, this is the thing. I keep telling my fellow conspiracy-minded trads, of which I am one, by the way, but I keep telling them, don't give the devil more than he's due. The left is demonic, okay? Which, this is the thing, and shameless plug and family be damned, I go over, demons don't actually work together because they're selfish. The only way they work together the same way that birds of prey work together, to eat a rotting carcass. But they'll turn on each other just as quickly if it means they can get more flesh. Okay, so the left is full of selfish, ideological, demonic actors. So we're seeing this in Canada already, and I said this would happen. Fidel Castro's son, my prime minister, he's promised vaccine, whatever. I don't know. I would listen to him because it makes me nauseous. But he is now saying, apparently, that it's going to be months, and everyone's going, you didn't procure enough vaccine. This whole idea of like, anyway, the point is they might have a couple million samples of this in like 3 months or something. There's 40 million Canadians. So now the conservatives, the so-called conservatives, they're a bunch of neocons at best. And they're just like, you didn't procure enough vaccinations. You don't care about the Canadian people. This is whatever. But the point is that they're starting to eat themselves because they're so incompetent, because they're morons. Okay. And they only care about power. So Justin Trudeau doesn't care about Canada. He cares about power. So if he's dealing with China, and Canada basically is owned by the Chinese at this point, if he's dealing with Chinese medical companies making vaccines or whatever, he's going to get whatever they allow him to get. And that might be enough for all the people in 5 months. It might be enough for all the people in 5 years. But he's not going to do anything good for Canadians, at least, supposedly, because he doesn't care about Canadians. He cares about himself. He cares about power. So the left is already starting to eat itself. So people worry about a forced vaccination. Listen, what is the thing that we know about government? Government can't follow through on any promise. Why do you magically think that they're going to follow through on this promise? And most promises don't even have resistance to them. But this one is like people are willing to die rather than take a vaccine. Government never follows through on any promises because they're all evil for the most part. They don't believe in any convictions that have anything to do with morality. It's all about power. Right now, they're promising vaccines. There will be businesses that might say you have to be vaccinated. But even then, even here in Canada, where our constitution is pretty weak, there's still a court system. And there will be things, if they try to come out and say you can't be a teacher, let's say, unless you have a vaccine. Oh my goodness. Do you know how many human rights lawyers are going to, even just at the chance of becoming famous, they will put their whole careers on that, and they'll be in courts for 6 months to a few years, just at the chance of fighting it. So again, no one knows what's going to happen with any of this, and it's going to be years before we see the ending of this charade. Just like there was 9/11 and there was all this stuff, and there were years of uncertainty and everything different or whatever, and then all of a sudden everyone kind of forgot about it. This is one of those major events that's happening in history. There'll be lasting changes. We have no idea what those will be, and the vaccine is just one pawn in this whole stupid game that we're playing right now.
Yeah, this is what we've known for years, is that the elected politicians do not represent the interests of the people, but the interests of the oligarchs. Exactly. That's their job. Their job is to please the people who elected them.
Yep.
And that means China, oligarchs, elites, businessmen, whatever, including pharmaceutical companies who have lobbied in their interests. And so pushing for this vaccine, they've never pushed for preventative healthcare. They've never pushed for take your vitamin C, take your hydroxychloroquine, whatever.
You're a conspiracy theorist.
Because all that stuff, it doesn't make money for the oligarchs.
No.
So
it's 10 cents. Yeah.
Right. I certainly, I do not want, I will not take any vaccine, either that's any participation in the murder of children, because it's at high risk, even if it's 95% effective in some kind of controlled environment that they created.
Yeah.
Who knows what's going to really happen? This is what like I said, Dr. Ethan, who is pro-vaccine, he said, no, we shouldn't do it because it's going to destroy even a good vaccine, because if you put it out at warp speed, there's going to be a bunch of side effects, and then everybody's going to get even more scared of it.
Yeah.
And then even if they made a good vaccine in the future, then they wouldn't be able to push it at that point.
Exactly.
So that's what happens when you do it at warp speed. So absolutely. So let's wrap up here. We're going to continue talking about the latest on the lockdown. What should we should do as Catholic?
It keeps on giving.
Yes.
like I was going to make a joke there, like a syphilis. I'm just kidding.
Oh no.
In civilization.
Oh man. So yes, indeed. Let's offer up at our Father for the gift of counsel from the Holy Spirit. The gift of counsel is supernatural prudence.
Yes.
That we can be given the insight into our intellect by the Holy Spirit, by God the Holy Spirit dwelling in us, to know the right course of action. Let's continue to stay together as brethren in Christ. Remember to love your neighbor, love your brother, love your Catholic brother if he disagrees with you. Let's work together against a common enemy. This infighting is making the devil just laugh. Mm-hmm. Make the devil cry instead by loving your brother, and let's work together here. So let's remember to share what we know, work together, ask for the gift of the Holy Spirit of counsel. So let's offer up an Our Father for that intention. Nomine Patris, Filii, Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Pater noster qui es in caeli, sanctificetur nomen tuum, adveniat regnum tuum, fiat voluntas tua, sicut in cielo et in terra.
Panem nostrum quotidianum da nobis hodie, et dimitti nobis debita nostra, sicut et nos dimittimus debitoribus nostris, et nos inducas in tentationem, sed libera nos a malo. Amen.
Nomine Patris, et Filii, Spiritus Sancti. Amen.